Diana was more than a princess. She was a demi-goddess. Beautiful and compassionate, she became the most loved and admired woman on earth. Her short life was the stuff of legend and myth, but it was never a fairy tale. The romance the world saw on her wedding day was flawed. No one lived happily ever after. Diana's story is about suffering and achievement, about love and loss, about tradition and change. Above all, it is about a woman without equal. Whose death made the world grieve. Diana's marriage to Prince Charles changed her life forever. At 20, she became the most famous and photographed person of all time. On July 29, 1981, almost 1 billion people watched a shy and inexperienced girl just out of her teens marry the heir to the British throne.
I, Diana Frances.
I, Diana Frances.
Take thee, Charles Philip Arthur George.
Take thee, Philip Charles Arthur George.
To my wedded husband.
To my wedded husband.
Charles was 12 years her senior, but almost a generation away from her youthful exuberance. She idolized him, but hardly knew him. She had even called him Sir. He found her kind and attractive, with the right English aristocratic background to bear heirs for the throne. It was a regal alliance between the flower of the Spencers, one of England's most noble families, and the House of Windsor, the ruling dynasty of Britain and its scattered Commonwealth. Diana's path moved swiftly from the life of a young and free kindergarten assistant to a royal bride.
To teach children, they said, why not come along? So I first started off doing afternoons, and then I took over the mornings and did whole days. But I only worked 3 days a week at kindergarten, and the other 2 I looked after an American baby boy.
Cameras were her constant and often unwelcome companions. But there was an insatiable clamour for pictures and stories about Diana. Charles hoped he would grow to love his gorgeous young bride-to-be, with her charm and delightful sense of humour. But the woman he really loved, Camilla Parker Bowles, would stand with the congregation at St. Paul's Cathedral, casting her dark shadow over the marriage.
I asked Diana before she went to Australia, 2 or 3 days before, because I thought it would be a good idea that, apart from anything else, if she went to Australia, she could then think about it, and if she didn't like the idea, she could say she didn't, or if she did, she could say that. But in fact, you actually said...
Yes, quite promptly.
Before you went to Australia, yes, that she's been brave enough to take me on.
And I suppose in love.
Of course.
Whatever in love means. So.
Here we see the royal couple on their honeymoon at Balmoral in Scotland. Motherhood soon followed. Prince William was born in June 1982, a few days before Diana's 21st birthday. Both Charles and Diana seemed to take equal delight in the new arrival. Diana's second child, always known as Harry, arrived in September 1984.
It was unclear, as he himself famously said in that interview, whatever love means, whether he was in love with her. To be honest, they scarcely knew each other. They'd barely met before they announced their engagement.
They should have formed a happy family unit. But the influence of Charles's inner circle of friends, who regarded Diana as an empty-headed showgirl, began to pull the couple apart. Naively, Diana had hoped that her youth, beauty and popularity would win her husband's love. Her inability to make him love her renewed deep feelings of insecurity and unworthiness that had troubled her since her parents separated when she was 6 years old. Diana was happiest in the company of her own children. She was unlike any previous royal mother. With her tactile approach, she turned her back on traditions of aristocratic childcare, which she found cold and distant.
Diana's life on the surface may have appeared to have been a glitzy, glamorous one. The undercurrent of her life, ever since her childhood, was really one of sadness and tragedy. The first main event in her life was her mother leaving when she was only 6 years old, her parents' divorce, her father remarrying a woman she didn't altogether like, although later in life they had a rapprochement.
She was plagued by illnesses, the eating disorder bulimia, which had its roots in her unhappy childhood, and also by postnatal depression. Behind that public image of a glamorous, superbly groomed fashion plate princess was a deeply complex young woman trying to cope with impossible demands. And nagging away at her was the knowledge that her husband could not give her the love she wanted. The Prince and Princess of Wales took Harry with William on his first day at kindergarten. Diana was determined that the royal children would be brought up in a more relaxed and caring fashion. William and Harry showed they understood the duty to pose for the cameras. Her sense of isolation and despair grew. Much later, in her famous Panorama interview, she said, "You have so much pain inside yourself that you cry out for help." But for the public, appearances had to be kept up. Diana throws herself into the spirit of the mother's race. Her real joy is on seeing her darling son rushing towards her.
I've done two biographies of Prince Charles, one on his 30th birthday in 1978, one on his 40th birthday in 1988. The first one, which was a huge bestseller in the United States, and I came over and traveled all over the country talking about it, portrayed a lonely, slightly frustrated, confused bachelor prince. It was before anybody had heard of Lady Diana Spencer. And of course there was enormous interest in him, and we have to remember that period when he was a dashing, glamorous, the world's most eligible bachelor, a playboy, polo-playing, parachuting prince, who had enormous international appeal of the kind that Diana subsequently took over. When I was asked to do it again on his 40th birthday 10 years later, so much had changed I wound up writing a whole new book rather than just revising the original one. He, of course, had become a father of 2 children, the marriage, and so on. One already sensed by then that the marriage was going wrong, but it was to no extent public, and I just sort of hinted at it in that book and got into a bit of trouble for doing so. But there's no doubt that he changed enormously between those 2 books, and people in America particularly were fascinated by how this dashing outdoor macho prince had turned into this rather spiritual, reflective, slightly depressive figure. And I think the effect of marriage really was to liberate him from the shadow of his parents.
A stiff, ordered world of royal protocol she found stifling and constraining. Princess Diana always deeply respected the Queen and the magnificent job she did. Here we see her in a rare light moment.
like a soap opera that needs new people brought into the cast from time to time. Diana and her friend Sarah, the Duchess of York, were the new female leads, and for them to have children rejuvenated the whole institution.
During the grim period in the middle part of her life with the prince, there was a glimmer of light from her relationship with the ebullient Sarah Ferguson. They recaptured some of the fun that the princess had known before her own wedding. Unfortunately, after the publication of revealing holiday pictures and a critical biography, Fergie suffered a catastrophic fall from royal grace.
So one of the things that I helped her to do was to get her to feel that she could do something about the situation. She wasn't trapped. She didn't have to be a passive kind of victim. And one of the ways was to convert that suffering into helping others who were also suffering. I mean, you transmute your suffering by dealing with others. It's what counselors, psychologists do all the time, so in a way. She probably would have done that anyway, but it was certainly something we discussed on that first occasion.
Prince and Princess of Wales tried to apply a diplomatic veneer to the cracks in their private life. Through interviews and articles, they tried to convince the world that all was well with their marriage. Diana sought solace in exercise and spiritual healing.
If there was something that I felt that I wanted to do during the time we were there, certainly the first time, was that it was quite clear she was suffering immensely. And when people are suffering a lot and they feel very trapped by their position, it makes them feel helpless.
But one thing I do feel strongly about is that Diana's eating disorder, the bulimia, that was a part of all that, that she was brave enough to go public about and talk about and work with other victims, that was a symptom of what was wrong in the marriage. It was caused by what happened in the marriage, there being, as she famously put it, 3 people in the marriage. I was quite closely involved as an observer in what we call the War of the Waleses, which was really a public relations war, as this marriage, after the separation, was heading inevitably towards divorce.
Camilla Parker Bowles was a long-time friend and old flame of the prince. And Charles, in a notorious BBC interview, admitted to an adulterous relationship with her.
It is announced from Buckingham Palace that, with regret, the Prince and Princess of Wales have decided to separate. Their Royal Highnesses have no plans to divorce, and their constitutional positions are unaffected.
After the Morton book came out, everyone knew the separation would have to be permanent. The divorce became fact on the 15th day of July, 1996. Diana started to forge a new life for herself, meeting some of the world's good and the great on an equal footing. On this occasion, the Emperor and Empress of Japan are delighted to meet the beautiful princess. Concerned about the ill health of her friend, the saintly Mother Teresa of Calcutta, the princess took time out in New York to visit this key spiritual figure in her life. How tragic it was that 2 such important women should die in the same week. News of the princess's death was conveyed to Mother Teresa as she lay gravely ill in Calcutta. Hearts are tugged as Diana and General Colin Powell make this little girl's year. The princess was always the star attraction. An SOS distress call from her close friends Jemima Goldsmith and her new husband, presidential candidate Imran Khan, told her that a Pakistani cancer hospital was in danger of closing for lack of funds. Ignoring warnings about her safety, Diana, staunch friend that she was, dropped everything to help the cause and successfully rescue the imperiled hospice.
The divorce obviously was a watershed. Everybody knew it was coming. Everybody in a way had taken their view on whose side they were on, insofar as people felt they had to. But I think vast sympathy went to Diana because of the terms of the divorce settlement. That was famously in July of '96, when she was deprived of her rank of Royal Highness. She was struck out of the prayers that are said for the royal family in churches throughout Christendom every Sunday. She was officially declared not a member of the royal family anymore.
Such was the immense popularity of the princess that nothing more disgusted the British people than stripping her of her royal title in what looked like an act of mean-mindedness.
I think the reaction in Washington is very much like the reaction every time Diana comes to America. The Americans love Diana, and I think the reaction that I've been hearing certainly all day today is, if Britain doesn't want her, we'd love to have her. The greatest line I had today was from a lady who was waiting to see Diana, and she said HRH anyway. She said it stood for her rotten husband. She's better off without it. We love her anyway.
The general sadness felt at the loss of her title became more painful following the tragic events in Paris a year later. In losing her HRH status, she also lost the services of the royal bodyguard who protect the lives of the royal family. Her first public engagement following the sad divorce, the princess met the First Lady, Hillary Clinton, at a breakfast fundraiser to raise money for breast cancer.
I want to welcome all of you, and particularly our guest of honor, Diana, Princess of Wales. I was thinking as I met her in the Blue Room that this is one of the nicest British invasions that the White House has ever had. The other one, as some of you may remember from history, burned the place down, but now we have the metaphorical equivalent of that excitement here in the White House.
The disastrous breakup of her marriage changed the direction of Diana's charity work. Instead of a huge range of organizations, she devoted herself to just a handful of issues and causes, those where she thought she could make a difference and change the face of world opinion. And she even challenged governments to change their minds. She became the champion of the voiceless, the powerless, and the sick. She catapulted issues into the headlines that no one except her could have forced onto the world stage. In a symbolic move to sever her links from her own dark ages, she gave away many of her old dresses from the world's greatest designers so that they could be sold for charity. As the princess was always in the public eye, the slightest change of appearance made newspaper and magazine headlines. And it was a new-look princess that faced the future. Such was her sense of style that every change was greeted with huge acclaim.
I remember her first as being a very shy young girl who actually had not yet found her way in terms of fashion. But over the years, she learned to develop a taste in clothes that were absolutely right for the lifestyle she led.
Right, well, what we have here is we have 10 years of Diana's fashions, right from the early days where she thought she had to be very staid and traditional, the heavy sequins, drop waists, right up to the independent Diana of the serpentine dress, cleavage, shoulders, which she loves. Like, this is what suits me and this is what I'm going to wear.
Diana was far from being a slave to fashion. She was her own woman.
What's the use of them hanging around in a wardrobe? I mean, if they can be out there earning money for charities, and after all, fashion changes so much, so they're really of no use to her, but you know, if it brings in money for the charities, that'll be fantastic. And it'll be interesting to see the kind of people that will buy them and what they'll be using them for, whether it'll be museums or private collectors or people actually be wearing them and saying, you know, I'm wearing Di's dress.
So that makes a grand total of just over $5,700,000, which I think is something of a record for a charity event.
The singer, Elton John, was a close friend of Princess Diana, and overcome by grief at the funeral of the world-famous fashion designer Gianni Versace, the musician was comforted with the gentle touch from a loving heart.
Those of us who had long-term plans with the Red Cross in which she was so deeply involved will not have her by our side. Those of us who've worked with her for years, seen her ability to bring to the attention of the public something like the landmine campaign. Indeed, she embraced the AIDS campaign when it wasn't fashionable. And of course, other campaigns, the English ballet, she had so many.
She worked unceasingly for lepers, AIDS victims, sick children and cancer sufferers. This work raised staggering amounts for the good causes close to the princess's heart. These pictures sounded a wake-up call to the world. Her Royal Highness dared to touch a leper, dared to feel deeply for an outcast. She challenged ignorance at any level. Wherever Diana, Princess of Wales, went, so did love. Wherever she went, so did hope. Diana, Queen of Hearts, worked tirelessly for the cause of children everywhere. But it was far beyond the call of duty. It was a special gift. She refreshed everyone she met, especially these children on kidney dialysis at the renowned Great Ormond Street Children's Hospital in London. The plight of the homeless deeply distressed the princess, and she made it her business to help.
I think it's important to her and important to us that she uses her profile to raise the fact that we're dealing with 3,000 young people a year, that this project will see 1,000 young people over winter, and these are somebody's sons and daughters.
The princess was the champion of AIDS charities.
But what Diana had, which none of the rest have, is an ability to gain access to the hearts of the mothers of people with AIDS, of the bigger general population, and be able to turn around what was seen as being fearful.
The Red Cross were fortunate to call on Diana to highlight the evils of landmines.
Ma'am, a government minister's home has said you're a loose cannon by supporting this campaign. Do you have any reaction to that? But, you know, I'm only trying to highlight a problem that's going on all around the world. That's all.
Were you surprised at the political furore that developed as a result of your visit to Angola?
I saw it merely as a distraction because I'm not a political figure. I am a humanitarian figure, and always have been and always will be.
We will concentrate, of course, on dissemination.
It's been a very intensive 4 days. I have seen a great deal. I've seen the people affected by landmines. I've seen the landmines themselves. Angola is an example of what the Red Cross can achieve around the world, given the sort of cooperation that we have seen that exists between the Red Cross and the NGOs and the Angolan authorities.
No other single person could have changed the policy of two major Western governments. She went on an all-out campaign to ensure that the issue didn't go away. Even the most dangerous and primitive of conditions didn't deter her.
As you can see. 1, 2, 3, firing.
A moment of great satisfaction in blowing up a landmine. Diana saw injuries too awful to describe. The princess interrupted her holiday to travel to Bosnia to raise the profile of the Red Cross campaign against mines.
But it was interesting to me how her sons kept coming up. Whatever you talked about, she would always find a way of bringing her sons into the conversation. They really were the mainstay of her life.
Princess Diana was like any ordinary mother. She hugely enjoyed the company of her children, and they hugely enjoyed hers. At her happiest, she could ignore the presence of the cameras. Prince William, in many ways so like his mother, has never been comfortable in front of the press. Diana, named after the goddess of hunting, became the most hunted woman of modern times. This was the scene moments earlier. The whole of the Argentina trip was marred by press intrusion. Even in the farthest reaches of Patagonia, thousands of miles from anywhere, the press pack pursued Diana for the least photo opportunity. Even on holiday as a private individual on the tiny tropical paradise of Barbuda in Antigua, Diana was forced to have heavily armed troops to ensure her safety and privacy.
Any person desired to be on an island for vacation deserved to be left alone for a while.
The tempo of the pursuit by the press, the paparazzi and the news media gathered pace with every year that passed. No longer a royal, but now without question the most photographed person on the planet. There was no hiding place from the telescopic lens. The news that the people's princess might have found a man worthy of her affection only served to whip up a storm of press attention. The Al Fayed's luxury yacht was surrounded by the hungry media. Each and every movement was scrutinized. Dodi Al Fayed was the son of billionaire Mohammed Al Fayed, the owner of the Harrods Empire.
It's all nonsense. The controversy is completely contrived and synthetic. This is a purely private family holiday. Two families together in the sun enjoying themselves. It was arranged very discreetly and it would have stayed entirely private but for the interest of the paparazzi.
While Dodi Al Fayed was in the Mediterranean, the press camped outside his London apartment in case he returned. Tony Blair, the new British Prime Minister, was obviously distressed by the dreadful news of the princess's accident as he spoke to the press shortly after the news arrived. The tragic couple had left the Al Fayed-owned Ritz Hotel in Paris and had been fatally injured when their Mercedes car struck a pillar in an underpass.
Prime Minister, can we please have your reaction to the news?
I feel like everyone else in this country today, utterly devastated. Our thoughts and prayers are with Princess Diana's family, in particular her two sons, the two boys. Our hearts go out to them. We are today a nation in Britain in a state of shock, in mourning, in grief that is so deeply painful for us. She was a wonderful and a warm human being. Though her own life was often sadly touched by tragedy, she touched the lives of so many others in Britain throughout the world with joy and with comfort. The people everywhere, not just here in Britain, everywhere, They kept faith with Princess Diana. They liked her, they loved her. They regarded her as one of the people. She was the people's princess.
Prince Charles and Diana's two sisters, Sarah and Jane, flew to Paris in a plane from the Queen's flight to recover the body of the princess. This was the first time a disbelieving nation had images that truly confirmed the dreadful news of the accident. The coffin was taken to lie in state in St. James's Palace. A nation grieved. The true extent of the sorrow was yet to be felt, as countless thousands and later millions took time and paid their heartfelt respects to the princess. Royal protocol was eventually abandoned, and Buckingham Palace flew a simple Union Jack flag at half-mast in tribute. The royal palaces were a sea of flowers and personal tributes to the Queen we never had. 1 week after the crash, the extraordinary funeral of Diana took place in front of a still shocked nation. More than 1 million came to London to mark her passing. 2 billion people watched worldwide. Every man, woman and child in the country grieved for the loss suffered by her poor children, William and Harry. Thousand upon thousands lined the streets and motorways taken by the cortege. This is the last the world will ever see of Diana, Princess of Wales. Diana has left many legacies for those less fortunate than herself, many gifts for those less able to find their voice. But her dearest treasures were always her children, and we fervently wish that they do not have to face the incessant pressures thrust upon the people's princess. They will sorely miss her guiding hand and loving comfort.
One hopes above all that Prince Charles will put those children before his public duty, which he's not always done hitherto, make more time to be with them, learn to hug them like their mother did. That's what they need. That's going to be the great void in their life.
Earl Spencer's compelling funeral vow to her living legacy, her sons, is a promise to protect them from these overwhelming pressures. Diana's body now lies on a serene island set in a lake much loved by her father, and bedecked with flowers given with love. In life, she wanted to be the Queen of Hearts. In death, she has claimed her title forever. These words were spoken at the funeral of Diana, Princess of Wales. Love never faileth, but whether there be prophecies, they shall fail. Whether there be tongues, they shall cease. Whether there be knowledge, it shall vanish away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when that which is perfect is come, then that which is in part shall be done away. When I was a child, I spake as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. For now we see through a glass, darkly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then shall I know even as also I am known. And now abideth faith, hope, and love, these three, but the greatest of these is love.